Off day for the Sabres. We have a mailbag to get to. I talked to Seth Appert, the Sabres assistant coach, this morning. There was one thing Appert said that just did not sit right with me. The Sabres style and how it has evolved over the last 2 years. That's coming up today on the Locked On Sabres podcast.
You're Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody, and welcome in to a Tuesday edition of the Locked On Sabres podcast. Appreciate y'all making us your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including our YouTube channel where you can watch the show. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode presented by FanDuel. Get the season rolling with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets if you win or lose your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Stinky Joe DiBiase coming to you on a Tuesday. We are in between games here for the Buffalo Sabres. They will next be in action tomorrow, Wednesday night at KeyBank Center. That is a 6 o'clock puck drop. Again, reminder to fans that might be going down to the arena. You're used to 7 because you always get 7. This game's at 6. There's no ceremony. The Rob Ray Hall of Fame ceremony is later in the month on the 25th. Tomorrow, I think, is because of the national TV schedule. TNT will have the game, and they'll have a doubleheader. So and they want that earlier, I guess. That's how I see it, why they want the Sabre game an hour earlier than you would normally get. So we got a lot to get to on today's episode of the Locked On Sabres podcast. We are going to have a mailbag edition of today's show. I got a thought on my conversation with Seth Appert this morning. Usually we talk to Lindy Ruff, but once in a while on WGR Tuesday mornings, we get Appert. Today we talked to the Sabres assistant coach. Did ask about the Amherst a little bit. Very impressed with what's going on down there, especially Devin Levi's performance, but more so on what's going on with the NHL club. So we'll get to a lot of that today on the show. And if you want to ever reach out and ask a question and want it read on the show or answered right away, you can hit us up in our Locked On Sabres text club, the place to do that. Join subtext.com/Locked On Sabres. And then from there, you are just getting, you're getting all the updates, practice lines during games, goal updates, results. Nowadays, maybe you'd rather watch something else, or maybe you got a night out planned and you're not feeling like you want to be finding a place to go with a TV. Like, you just don't care enough because of what's going on right now. So, we bring that to you as well. A lot to get to in the text club today for our mailbag edition, and I'm excited to get to that a little bit later. But I do want to start with practice. There were really nothing new from yesterday. The Sabre lines are still the same, all the pairings, and it looks like these will be the lines as they go into tomorrow night against Carolina. And Henry Jokiharju playing with Owen Power again is my biggest gripe with it. Everything else pretty much remains the same. There's been a bug going on, I guess, in the Sabre locker room, but doesn't look like it'll keep anybody out at this point in time. The thing I wanted to get to start today was something that we've touched on here as the season has gone along, and even a little bit at the end of last year, but it's really picking up steam for me internally as a big reason why the Sabres have had the 2 seasons now that they have since they missed the playoffs by a mere point, one single point. And I thought that was emphasized this morning. I asked Seth Appert, who's a very good interview. I like talking to Appert. I think he's a smart guy. I think he's probably the Sabres coach in waiting for however long Lindy Ruff is here, whether it's 1 year, 2 years, maybe there's a short-term extension after that. Whenever Lindy is done, I would imagine Appert is the guy that would take over. It's just a guess of mine. So I like Appert. Talking to him and asking him about the style of play and how, 2 years ago it was easily identified what the Sabres wanted to be. They wanted to be up and down the ice. They wanted to score a lot of goals, and they were going to be willing to make some mistakes in the name of development, and they were going to be putting their goaltenders in really tough spots, but hopefully the goalies could kind of pull them out of that. And that formula almost worked, right? Like if they had just had a goaltender that was a little bit better, a league average goaltender, that team makes the playoffs, and we are not talking about a 14-year playoff drought right now. So that was easily identified 2 years ago. Last year, if you will recall, there was a lot more confusion. We could never really figure out where they were in their journey from their self-appointed journey, right? Like they made an internal decision. Hey, that was really fun. We almost made the playoffs. Let's do something completely different. Let's play a completely different style. And on some level, I do get it. You want to be a more mature hockey team. You would like to be a team that's more capable of shutting the other team down, holding leads. Not the Sabres had to win games 2 years ago under Don Granato a lot of times where they'd be up by a goal and it was, okay, we're probably giving up another one, so we got to keep trying to get one. Like it was keep the pace, keep ahead of the pace. And sometimes you blow leads doing that. Although I will say not nearly as often as they're blowing leads this year, not even close. So last year, again, it's more confusion because we got to play in our own end. And all these guys that were great playing wide open style, we need to ask them to do something completely different. And those guys struggled doing that. A lot of them. I would put Dylan Cousins, number one on the list, the guy you would think on paper would be easily translatable from a wide open style to a more balanced style, was not really doing well doing it. And Thompson, I thought, actually did make strides, but then he got hurt, and so on and so forth. We don't need to go too much into last year. So I asked Appert because this year, I don't really know what they want to be. Like the results have been so poor that we haven't even really had time to focus on what do they want? Like at the beginning of the year, it was more about discipline, and they were doing push-ups at practice. And I think ideally it felt like, okay, Lindy Ruff likes to play an attacking style and a buttoned up version of his game. So they want to be balanced. And I think that's probably what they're doing, but there have been ebbs and flows. There have been times this year where it feels like they are trying to play more aggressive. And then there have been other times where they're very backed off and conservative and trying to play in their own end and not make mistakes. And I just don't know that they have an identity as a team. And I think they're kind of far away from that even being a question because we don't even know if their players are good, right? Like 2 years ago, they had an identity, but part of that was we knew Thompson was good. We knew Cousins was good. We knew that Tuck was good and Dahlin, like Power, even as a rookie, like you had all of these guys playing well. So then you form your identity. Since then, I don't know what they are looking for, but I know the thing they are not looking for because this is how they've spoken since last year and into this year. They don't want to play the way they played 2 years ago. They don't want to do it. They do not believe you can win in the NHL doing that. And that was the same message that we got this morning. I asked Appert about what they want to be, and he did make the comparison to 2 years ago and said, you can't trade chances and expect to win in the NHL. That was said by the Sabres assistant coach this morning. And I don't think he stepped in it. I don't think he said anything that he doesn't believe or that the organization doesn't believe. I just kind of can't believe it. I kind of can't believe the attitude of the organization as a whole is so anti-Granato hockey. You don't have to, I call it Granato hockey because he was the one that always talked about, flying up and down the ice and we want to play an entertaining style. We want the fans to be into it. The players have fun playing that style of hockey. Granato was always the champion of that style, and he was the head coach. So I call it Granato hockey. When I think of Granato hockey, that's what it is. And they are so anti-Granato hockey now. It just, every time the question comes up, it's just, no, we can't play like that. We absolutely can't play like that. You can't win doing that. Like, that's what Appert said this morning. It's how Lindy has sounded. It's certainly how Kevin Adams has sounded over the last 2 years. And I just kind of can't believe it. It's almost downright disrespectful to that team from 2 years ago. That is the best Sabres team in 15 years, right? You could argue, in fact, I might, if you want to include goaltender, then I wouldn't. But if you take goalie out of it, that team from 2 years ago is better than the last two Sabre playoff teams. Compare that team to the Mike Greer, Jason Pominville, Thomas Vanek, Nathan Gerby 2010 team that won the division. That team had a better group of skaters 2 years ago. The team in 2010 won the division because Miller had a Vezina season. The year after, now Ennis gets thrown into the mix with a similar group of players, and they finish 7th. Again, Miller being a constant helped that along. That roster 2 years ago was more talented, top to bottom, than the last two Sabre playoff teams. They missed by 1 point, and that team that I'm sure internally, they never would have said this out loud in the media, I'm sure internally we're begging them to give them a goaltender. Please, anybody. Cam Talbot is always the name that comes to mind for me. And maybe there's other ideas that season that would have worked for this. But give us an average goaltender and we will make the playoffs. And they would have. I think they absolutely would have. And they traded for a veteran goaltender on the level of Craig Anderson, who was 40 and couldn't play all the time. A younger version of that quality, you would have made it. And maybe they would have never changed their style. Or maybe they would have anyway. Maybe they thought, we can't play in the playoffs that way. But it's just kind of wild to me. There seems to be this disrespect of that style of hockey. And they're, oh, no, we can't do that. And it continues to make me believe that as long as this regime is in charge of the Buffalo Sabres, they will never go back to that. They will never go back to that. And listen, sure, the Panthers, look at the Panthers. The Panthers played that style. They did with Jonathan Huberdeau. They played that style for years, and they had a lot of fun seasons, and they made the playoffs. A bunch of different times. They won a couple of rounds even, but then they would run into the Tampa Bay Lightning, and they would get stomped. And to me, the Sabres kind of put the cart before the horse here. The Panthers went through it for a couple of years. They played that offensive style, took a ton of chances, weren't buttoned up in their own end. They played that way. And then finally, after running into the Lightning for the third time in a row in the second round, they decided, after making the playoffs several times, keep in mind, then they decided, okay, let's try something else. Let's trade Huberdeau, our all-time leading scorer, for Matthew Tkachuk. Let's get Sam Bennett. Let's get tough. Let's keep the skill as much as we can, but let's get big, physical, and mean and add that to our offense, and then we'll win. And that's worked for them, and they won the Stanley Cup. But at the outset, they were a playoff team. And the Sabres didn't get there. They didn't get there. To me, you get there first, and if you have a couple of playoff failures, and then you want to change up your style, go ahead. But at the first sign of improvement, to say we're going to change it, it's been a 2-year journey of ridding themselves of that style of hockey, and it's almost flabbergasting to me that that is the attitude of the organization. So, quick thought on that there. When we come back, we'll get into our mailbag edition. I'm giving you a mailbag on a day after, I guess, the Sabres had this Blue and Gold Insight event where throughout the season, it's supposed to be for players, season ticket holders at the arena. Fans go up and they get, to talk to players and management. And last night, it kind of made the rounds that there was no management that showed up. It was Zach Benson, Jack Quinn, and Bo Byram speaking on behalf of the organization with Brian Duff on the panel. And I think I saw that Adams has not done that event since the offseason, and maybe even in June or July. So, if you're not getting the answers you want from that event, then I'll try my best to give you them. Even though I'm not obviously knowing what's going on in Adam's office or Lindy's office on a day-to-day basis. When we come back, we got questions about Elias Pettersson, updating that, a Joel Farabee trade idea. We could revisit that from Philadelphia, and more about the Sabres. So that's coming up here in the Locked On Sabres podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Sabres podcast is presented by FanDuel Sportsbook. The playoff football season is awesome. What a weekend we've got ahead of us. I am so tense about this game on Sunday night at 6:30. That is one of those games I am not going to need to open up FanDuel. But, beforehand, all those games before the college playoff, we got the national championship coming up as well. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the playoffs are so much better with FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same game parlays, and so much more. So be sure to visit FanDuel.com, join today, and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. Back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. All right, let's go through our mailbag. If you'd like to throw in a question, hit us up on our text club. If you're not in our text club, you can sign up. Join subtext.com/LockedOnSabres. And let's start with number one. Did general manager and coach mishandle their younger players? Did they overstock too many young forwards? And did they call up too many players early, a la Cousins, Krebs, Quinn, Benson, Peterka, and didn't get a chance to fully develop? That is a very good question. I am someone that usually sides with development in the NHL is okay, but if you're in the right role. And these guys, by the way, all did play some NHL. Not all, sorry, I shouldn't say all. Some of them did. If you look at Krebs, Quinn, Peterka, for instance, those three played a combined 155 AHL games. So about a full season for Peterka and Quinn, and then grab a handful of games for Krebs. Benson obviously is different. Benson did not play in the AHL. So, listen, if you are supposed to be a top six forward and you have taken steps in your development, you've gone from, in Peterka's case, star player over in Germany, you go to the AHL and you're an AHL all-star and you are a point per game player, bam, you should get called up to the NHL. To me, that's the way it should work. And I don't need to send you to Rochester for an extra year. Jack Quinn, same thing. You played really well in Rochester, you're good to come up. Maybe a bigger problem is their roster has never been good enough. They've never made enough veteran acquisitions to block these guys. And not all of them. You want one spot, two spots available, but yeah, maybe in hindsight. And that is not something I would have ever argued for. I would admit I was wrong on that because I would have loved them 3 years ago and would have applauded them for creating spots for the young kids to come up and kind of win and learn together. And, maybe in hindsight, that was a little naive. Maybe one or two spots was good to have, but to have all the kids come at the same time with, 155 games, not nothing of AHL experience between those three, but it's not a lot. I mean, it's 50 games each on average. And then again, Benson didn't play at all. And I have had a thought about Benson because he is such an interesting player to me, such a curious case because he's very unique. And I'm always trying to figure out what he is, what his value is, what he's going to be. And I have had a little bit of a worry lately about Benson, who I don't think will ever not be a valuable player in the NHL. Look at his advanced numbers. He's so good. His team is the better team when he's out there on the ice. He's a smart player. He's a great defensive player. My concern, I guess, with him being here now for 2 years and playing in more of a role player role, right? He penalty kills. He doesn't put up a lot of points. He doesn't really get a lot of offensive opportunities, and part of that is his size and his skating. But Benson, what I wonder is, are you doing harm to Zach Benson's long-term offensive game by currently having him in the NHL? Because every day that goes by, every year that goes by, Benson is forgetting what it's like to be the best offensive player out there on the ice. Oftentimes, he's one of the worst offensive players out there on the ice. Just not overall impact, it's there. He has a good sense. He has a good mind of the game. He keeps plays alive. But when you're thinking finishing opportunity by scoring goals, when you're thinking breaking away from the pack on a breakaway, when you're thinking about, getting these quality passing opportunities in the slot or, back door, those opportunities don't come as often for him because he just doesn't have the physicality to do it. So every year that passes, he's forgetting what it's like to be the best offensive player. And This is something I think happened to Krebs. Krebs played for multiple seasons with Kyle Okposo and Zemgus Girgensons, and I think it slowly drained the offensive juice from him, where all that creativity and playmaking ability that he was so good at in juniors, he went so long without ever using those skills that when you went back to ask him to do it, it's like, okay, but I haven't really done it in 3 years. And that's what I wonder. I wonder if that's happening with Benson right now. That being said, like, I wouldn't send him down. I mean, he'd have to go to juniors right now. I think he's too good for that. So, second question, is Power an untouchable trade asset? Absolutely not. I would say no on Owen Power. I don't think anybody should be untouchable on this team. 3, if the Sabres are in the same position near the trade deadline, who do you believe gets traded? Bo Byram, Zucker, McLeod, Greenway, Cousins are the names that this texter asks about. The deadline's going to be weird. I don't know what to expect. I think I'll stay with the first 2 names you mentioned. I don't think they're trading Ryan McLeod. I don't think they're trading Jordan Greenway, although Greenway would be a rental, but I think they probably want to extend him, and that's maybe more likely. Cousins, always possible. I'm going to start with the top 2, though, because to me, those are the 2 guys that there's a timeline on. Zucker and Byram. Both players I would bet, and actually Zucker, we know this already. There was a report about it. Zucker and Byram, I bet the Sabres want to re-sign. And it's going to come down to how likely do they think that is to happen. Now, Zucker, the deadline is quicker because he's a UFA at the end of the year. You could want him to sign if he tells you, listen, I'm appreciative of the offer, and maybe in a different circumstance I would do it, but I'm 33 years old and I want to go win a Stanley Cup. So I would prefer if you trade me. And if Zucker comes to you and says that, you trade him. Right? Or even any version of that. If you don't think he signs an extension by the deadline, if you don't think he's going to do it, then you trade him because you could probably get something at least half decent. Maybe you get a 2nd round pick, but maybe you could squeak out a 1st. I don't know. And then there's Byram. And I think the Sabres should want to hold on to him at all costs. If I were Kevin Adams, I would have to have him tell me directly, or the agent tell me directly, he's not signing an extension here, before I would move him. If I think there's even a chance that I'm re-signing him, I am good to go into the offseason with him as a restricted free agent and even into next year with only 1 year on a deal, if that's all he signs in RFA status. If that's in doubt, I would not move Bo Byram. Love the player. I think he's a top pair defenseman on this team for a good reason. And I would try to sign him. And unless he told me there's no way I'm staying in Buffalo, I mean, then I would move him. Clearly. And I think you would get a good amount for him. But that's it for Byram. When we come back, the other 2 mailbag questions to get to are about trade ideas for players from other teams. We'll give you an update on Elias Pettersson for a question there, and then revisit Joel Farabee, who we have not talked about since like the summer, and how that could be going. That's ahead here in the Locked On Sabres podcast. Today's episode of the show presented by Rocket Money. Rocket Money, helping you find any subscriptions that you forgot about and that you didn't realize you were paying for twice, maybe. That's happened to me. Had a subscription I forgot about, didn't realize I had for years, actually. It was super inexpensive, so it could have been much worse, but still, I mean, that does add up over time. Rocket Money is a personal finance app, helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals that you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions. Be sure to reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. To do that, go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Again, the website, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Mailbag edition of today's episode of the Locked On Sabres podcast. Sabres in action against Carolina at home tomorrow, 6 o'clock. That's a very good Hurricanes team. Let's get to the mailbag. And the 2 things the other questions I wanted to get to are about other players on other teams. One asking just simply any update on Elias Pettersson. And here is what I got for you, doing some digging. Have there been any rumors? Because nothing's really popped up on my feed lately. And there's nothing that ties the Sabres to Pettersson. There's nothing also that really puts any cold water on the fire that he's not available. Like, I think he is. The latest reports are that the Canucks are willing to consider trading him to a Western Conference team. That would actually further indicate that they are willing to trade him. I mean, that they want to do it. Man, like, that's, remember with Eichel, we always had this question of would they ever send him in the East? And there was always this belief that they didn't want to do that. I mean, man, if the Canucks are willing to trade him in conference, then one of two things is true. One, they're a smart organization who doesn't care about, what conference you get it. You just take the best offer. Or two, they really want to trade him. And that might be where I put my chips right now. They really want to trade him. The other report is that the Islanders have inquired about Elias Pettersson. So the Islanders are in the ball game. They're looking to get him. And as we've mentioned, I'm sure every team is looking at him and has inquired about what the price is. I would be surprised if there weren't 27 teams that have called Vancouver about trading him. Like, maybe Calgary didn't because they just assume, well, we're a rival. They wouldn't do that. And then finally, one other question that we have to get to today. Actually, two more I want to get to. First, though, on Joel Farabee of the Philadelphia Flyers, a player we talked about in the offseason as a trade idea for the Sabres. I liked it as a move. I liked the Krebs idea. Krebs and maybe a pick for Farabee in the offseason. That did not happen. This listener is asking, any chance of flipping Cousins for Farabee, change of scenery for two struggling players? Now, that's the point. Joel Farabee is struggling. A guy that scored 20 goals last year, 22 goals on the season in 23-24 and 50 points this season in 42 games, has 6 goals and 8 assists. He's on pace for like 12 goals and 30 or 28 points. Really bad year offensively. His minutes have gone down. His shooting percentage is at a career low. It's been a bad year for Joel Farabee. So Cousins for Farabee, I would say no to that because Farabee has been that bad. And I know Cousins has been bad too, but Cousins is a center, at least, for the time being he is. And I would want more. I would want Farabee plus something for Cousins. If I were the Sabres and I were looking to buy low on Farabee, I would be trying to push that Krebs idea again on them. Krebs and something. I'd rather do that than trade Cousins away for Farabee. And then finally, this is not about a trade idea, but that was an interesting question. What are historical qualities and playoff qualities Sabre teams from the past that we have lacked for the past 14 years? And that's a good question. I mean, you're comparing what did the 2011 Sabres have? What did the 05-06 Sabres have? What did 06-07 have that this team doesn't? And you're going to get different answers for that. I kind of spoke to this earlier. The key difference between this team over the last, you want to say 5 years or 14, one key difference between the last playoff team for the Sabres, the 2010 and 2011 Sabre teams that made back-to-back playoff appearances, and more recent Sabre teams is Ryan Miller, right? Like, go look at that 2011 roster. Go look at their numbers from that season, not just like goals and assists. Go look at like some of the advanced numbers. It was not a very good hockey team. They were fine. They were fine. They were not terrible. They were really bad down the middle, right? Like, they had good wingers, Pominville and Vanek, but center-wise, they were kind of not really there. Especially 11 when they didn't have Derek Roy all season. He was injured, remember? So the rosters weren't, worse. You just had a foundational goaltender that you knew what you were going to get. You knew he was going to steal games for you. You had a baseline with Ryan Miller in net. And listen, I've liked Luukkonen's development a lot, but he's not Ryan Miller. Not even close. So that's the key difference between that team. And then 05, 06, 06, 07, the biggest difference? It's not even Briere. Like, I was going to say Briere and Drury. It's not. They kind of have Briere. Was Briere better than Tage Thompson? Probably. But Briere was your star offensive center. He was going to get you points. He was going to produce on the power play. He was going to be out there in the key offensive situations. He was going to stockpile goals and assists. And they have that. They have Tage Thompson. He is some version of that. You want to tell me Briere is better than Thompson? I wouldn't argue with you for a second. But you have a version of that. They do not have a Chris Drury. That is, if of all the playoff teams of my life, and they're not many, there's 4 really. I mean, I'm a little young to remember 2001. I mean, I'm 6. The biggest thing they don't have is a Chris Drury. Chris Drury walked into the building, looked around, and said, where are all the pictures of the Stanley Cup? He walked in, and Tim Connolly has told this story when he was on Spit and Chicklets, and other former Sabres have. Chris Drury walked into the building and set a freaking standard for this hockey team. He walked in a leader. He walked in ready to take over and change the culture. And he did that. He absolutely did that. And he did it as a great player. None of this fake leadership from fourth line guys who put up 8 goals a year and then are leaders. You know, Eichel once spoke to that. Like, you know, we need our leaders to also carry their weight out in the ice. He said some version that I think he was talking about Josh Georges at the time. And Georges was kind of the same thing. Like, this is a leader, right? George is a leader in the locker room, but he stinks. So how much are you supposed to believe in the guy leading you when he's one of your lesser players? Drury was the leader, commanded that everybody, you know, step their game up while being one of their best players. That's the biggest difference. That's the biggest difference between what they are now and being a great team. They don't have a Chris Drury. And that's hard to get. You know, it's one of Darcy's best trades. He got Drury for very little from Calgary. Like that to me, if you told me there's a trade out there, I can recreate a trade from the last 25 years of Sabres history to this team right now, I would want to recreate the Drury trade. That guy's not out there, right? Like that guy's not available right now. Elias Pettersson is a great idea, and I like the idea of trading for him. He's not Chris Drury. He's an elite player. He's another Briere. And Briere, by the way, set a standard too. Like, but I don't know. I've heard more stories about what Drury did in that regard, even than Briere did. So Drury would be the biggest difference to me, honestly. And I know it's only one individual, but sometimes it's all it takes. All right, that's going to do it for us today on today's edition of the Locked On Sabres podcast. We will talk tomorrow ahead of Sabres and Hurricanes. Try to hit on I might change sneaky good parlay to sneaky good bet. One bet of the night. Parlays are tough. You know, like I'm not a big parlay guy other than what we do here on the show. They're just, you don't get them all that often. And that goes for, even if you're good at parlays, you know, like you're not hitting them, you know, maybe if you're lucky 15% of the time, 20% of the time. We hit one a couple weeks ago, but maybe we'll change that up to sneaky good bet. If you got another question you want to ask on the show, hit us up, joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSabres. You can hit us up on our text club. We'll talk tomorrow on a game day. Check out Joe Marino, Locked On Bills, had a Bills and Ravens this week. And if you're looking for some fantasy hockey tips, Steal and Flip got you covered with Locked On Fantasy Hockey. You can check both of those shows out wherever you get your podcasts. We'll talk tomorrow here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.